All right, well, good afternoon. Welcome to the PlanRVA Better Together webinar. My name is Rashonda Lanier Jackson, and I serve as the Community Engagement Manager. If you are joining us for the first time, PlanRVA is where the region comes together to look ahead. We were established in 1969 as the Richmond Regional Planning District Commission, which is how we're now known as PlanRVA. PlanRVA has been the home of cooperation among the 9 jurisdictions of Central Virginia for more than 50 years. Today, we focus in areas of community development, emergency management, the environment, and transportation. We are the seer of the future, convener of our member jurisdictions and regional partners. We are the creator of plans of action and shaper of Central Virginia's future. Tomorrow's solutions are born here. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our
Google Chrome.
Stop. Go ahead. Sorry.
Today, I have the pleasure.
Want to see.
Let me turn that off. Sorry.
Good, Matthew. No worries. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Matthew Shapiro. Matthew is an approachable, easygoing individual who has lived his life breaking down the barriers of disability. Born with cerebral palsy and using a wheelchair for his mobility, Matthew knows that people are naturally curious about his condition and how he manages his multifaceted life. As an educator, he welcomes questions relating to his life, his disability, and his mindset. He knows that honest dialogue results in increased understanding and promotes positive changes. Using his positive outlook to enlighten audiences on a variety of topics, including disability, leadership, relationships, employment, safety, and more, Matthew's interactive presentations make participants smile and leave them with a fresh perspective. Welcome, Matthew. We are so glad to have you.
Awesome. So glad to be here. And I always love chatting with my friends at PlanRVA and just ready for a super exciting conversation. So Rashonda, if you could share a screen for me.
Well, yeah, and before we actually jump into the presentation, Matthew, I first want to understand and also want to share with the audience. I like to start off with this question, which is, help us understand, why do you do this work? What about it keeps you up at night?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Rashonda. I love it. So I'm a person with a disability, as you said in my lovely introduction, and I have always wanted to challenge the way people think about, talk about, and approach disability and disability inclusion. And my goal really is to sort of challenge the status quo. I'm kind of tired of the status quo as it relates to disability in our communities, and I want, PlanRVA and other wonderful organizations that I work with to think about how to be more inclusive to the disability community. And I'll explain a couple of reasons why in the presentation today, but yeah, it definitely keeps me motivated every day to reach people and to try and change people's perspectives on things that they could be doing in their work, their personal life, and anything to help include the disability community.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. Please feel free to add your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Our team will be monitoring the chat for any issues or questions, and we'll have time near the end of the hour for questions from the audience. So without further ado, we will jump into the presentation.
Sure. So Rashonda, while you're pulling that up, I'll just go ahead and get started. But again, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be with some of you and be back with some of you as well. I know I like to consider myself a very familiar face with PlanRVA. And so today I'm just really hoping that this will be a very interactive and hopefully engaging presentation. Next slide, Rashonda. A little bit about me, as Rashonda said, she did a wonderful job in my intro. I'm 30 years old. I reside in Richmond, Virginia, born and bred. I graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University in the fall of 2013 with an interdisciplinary studies degree that had components of sociology, psychology, public policy, and special education. So that was my one degree. And then because of all my sociology credits, I was able to get a second degree in sociology. Some of my hobbies include sports, big time UVA football fan. I'm a season ticket holder, hanging out with friends and family, and working on my business, Six Wheels Consulting, to help people think differently about disability and inclusion. And I founded Six Wheels Consulting in December of 2014. So we are rocking and rolling and have been for many years now. In order to next slide, in order to frame today's conversation, I want to start with a short video that talks about disability inclusion and other things, right? We're going to talk about inclusion and disability etiquette, but we're also going to talk about how do we bring disability into the workspace. So I will let Rashonda roll the video, if you don't mind.
Matthew, can you see YouTube on your screen?
I can. Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. Is it in full view?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. And then I just want to make sure that I have the sound on. All right.
Good morning, Bob.
Morning there, big man. Morning, Alice!
There's no need to be awkward.
Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention! Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What? Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind.
May I help you?
Does not mean I'm deaf.
I don't know. I think he said he was gonna come, but... Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath. Relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi. Would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alice.
Right.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
So I love that video, and I use that video a lot in a lot of my trainings and stuff. because it does a really wonderful job of framing kind of what the conversation is going to be about. A lot today, we're going to cover some of that, and then we're going to talk about my work and some other specifics as well. So next slide, please. Oops, I hit the wrong thing. Hold on one second. There we go. To also kind of continue to challenge our thinking. I love this picture too, because what does everyone think this is? And feel free to put it in the chat. What comes to mind when people think this is. I'll wait a minute or two or a couple seconds and get some people to put some answers in the chat. And Rashonda, if anyone puts anything in the chat, please feel free to share it with me.
Absolutely. And I mean, I guess I'll go first, Matthew. So in this picture, it looks like these balloons are being weighted down, potentially by a ball or maybe another balloon. So that's my best guess.
Good guess.
Else? Anybody in the audience?
I should have described it a little bit better for everyone. I'm sorry about that. Anything coming through?
Not yet.
Okay.
I see something. Oh, it says the chat is disabled.
Oh, well, that won't help us.
Know that. All right. Apologies about that.
Since we're fixing that, I'll give it another second.
All right. Let me know if that's fixed.
Well, for time
there
purposes.
We go. Yeah, Matthew. So we got balloons in a field.
Yes, we have balloons in a field. That's correct. So what this actually is an adaptive Easter egg hunt. So typically, right, somebody with mobility challenges or dexterity challenges or other disability challenges may have a hard time participating in a traditional Easter egg hunt. And so they put the Easter egg on the bottom of the balloon, and as they can go around collecting the Easter eggs, instead of grabbing the egg, they grab the balloon and the egg is attached to the bottom. So I use this image because it sort of talks about and illustrates, we have to think outside of the box in ways to make things fully inclusive, not only for people with disabilities, but for everybody. So again, that's sort of another way of framing today's conversation. Next slide. So disability by the numbers. Next slide. Why is disability so important? Well, it is a huge population of the U.S. population, right? So about 56 million Americans in the U.S. live with some type of disability. So that's about 19% of the population of the U.S. And that number is probably increasing too because of long haul COVID cases, more aging folks, different things like that. So if we break down those numbers even further, that's 1 in 5 people have a disability. Again, so around 20% of the population are people with disabilities. So, this is not a small population of our citizenry. It is a significant portion of the citizens in the United States. So it's really important that we think about how we best serve this population. Next slide, please. The other really important thing to think about is the business case and the spending power of people with disabilities. So people with disabilities have about $220 billion in discretionary income that they have at their disposal. So that could mean not only themselves as the individuals with disabilities, but the people that are with them when they are shopping or spending money, right? So family members, significant others, attendant care providers, different people could also be spending money in these environments. And 87% of businesses say that they would make their business accessible to people with disabilities. And a significant portion of an existing organization's workforce, about 20%, will experience some kind of disability during their time in the workforce at a given job. Next slide, please. There are two really important factors that I love to remind people of, or things to consider about the disability community when I do programming. The first is that disability is the only minority group any of us can join in the blink of an eye. We can wake up one day and, you know, through some kind of incident or tragedy or some other occurrence, right, our life can change instantly. Not to say that our life is worse, right? You can still have an amazing, thoughtful, full life as a person with a disability, but you have to change the way you are sort of approaching life. And then the other element is that disability is the only minority group that we're all going to eventually join, right? Because as we age, we're going to need different accommodations in order to make sure that we live our life to the fullest as we get into kind of that twilight portion of our life. Next slide, please. Disability etiquette and sensitivity. So this next section and these next handful of slides, we're going to go through some basics of disability etiquette. So there are two main types of disabilities, those that are visible and those that are invisible. And so next slide. Visible disabilities are those disabilities that are immediately apparent when you see a person enter the room. So for those of you that know me, and as Rashonda said in my introduction, I'm a wheelchair user. And so when I enter a space, right, it is pretty obvious that I am a person with a disability based on my wheelchair. That is a visible disability. You might not know specifically what my disability is, but you may recognize that you obviously would recognize that I would have some kind of disability. Other examples of visible disabilities are cerebral palsy, which is my disability, muscular dystrophy, that would also potentially, excuse me, excuse me, everybody, my nose is running. Muscular dystrophy, Down syndrome, you can traditionally by facial features and other structural things tell when somebody has Down syndrome and or when someone is blind, typically because they have a service animal or are using a cane to navigate a space. Next slide, please. The other type of disability are those disabilities that are invisible disabilities. And so those disabilities are not immediately apparent based on seeing the individual in a space. So these could be your learning disabilities, your ADHD, your dyslexia, your rheumatoid arthritis, your depression and mental illness challenges, all kinds of things like that. Chronic medical conditions, other intellectual and developmental disabilities, ADHD, like I said previously. So this is not a disability that is, again, immediately apparent when you see the individual come into the room. Next slide, please. One of the most important things that we can do is think about the language that we're using when we are addressing people with disabilities. So I am going to share two two types of language that can be used when describing people with disabilities. The first is person-first language. Next slide. So person-first language is you use the person, you talk about the person before you talk about the disability. So you put the emphasis on the person first before you talk about the disability. So rather than defining the person primarily by their disability, people first language focuses on the person and conveys respect. So I want to go to the next slide for me, please. Here are some examples of person first language. So again, because the person comes before the disability, they are people with disabilities, people without disabilities. people diagnosed with autism or cerebral palsy. Again, the person comes before the disability. Next slide. A few more examples are, again, a person with Down syndrome, a person who has been diagnosed with autism, and a person of short stature. So person comes before the disability. Next slide.
Alert from Google Chrome.
Stop it.
LeBron vows to be more aggressive.
Sorry, everyone. If anyone's a LeBron James fan, they might like to hear that. You don't want to say things like this: the handicapped, the disabled, normal, healthy, whole, or typical person afflicted with or suffers from. I don't suffer because of my disability. I have bad days, but that certainly doesn't mean I suffer. Next slide. Additionally, you wouldn't want to say things like the cripple, dwarf, or midget, the autistic, right? You would say person with autism. So that is person first language. Next slide. The other type is identity first language. So identity first language is where you put the person's their disability identity before the person. So it sort of is the inverse of person first language. Many people with disabilities also embrace identity first language, which positions the disability as the identity category. This language is known as identity first, like I said. So the identifier of their disability comes first, hence why it's called identity first language. Some examples, next slide. I am a disabled person. I am an autistic person. I am a little person. So again, having that disability identifier be an integral part of their identity. So hence why it's called identity first language. Next slide. I am a deaf person. I am a wheelchair user. I am a cane user. Again, it describes their disability or identifies their disability first. Next slide. You do not want to do this. So again, people with disabilities, people without disabilities, person who has been diagnosed with, again, that goes back to our person first language. This is not language. Listen to me, that was funny. This is not identity first language. So again, these are kind of examples of person first. Next slide. Again, a couple more examples that we already talked about: person who has Down syndrome, person who has been diagnosed with autism. Again, these are not examples of identity first. These are more examples of person first. Next slide, please. The biggest piece of knowledge I can give you in regards to this is if you're unaware or if you're unsure of whether to use people first or identity first language when talking to someone, what you want to do is ask them what their preference is, right? Some people may prefer identity first. Some people may prefer person first. For me, there have been many instances where I will start one conversation using person first language and saying I'm a person who uses a wheelchair. And then within that same conversation, unknowingly kind of switch to identity first language, which is always a great way to trick my brain, but it really comes down to what that person's preference is. And so it's all about having communication with them to say, hey, what is your preference? That is kind of our section on language, and this is a good frame of reference to how we want to be talking to people with disabilities. Next slide, please. Disability etiquette. Oh, yep, go back for me. Okay, go next slide. Next slide.
Nothing's playing right now.
Perfect. I'll go back one slide. Perfect, right there. Oh boy, we keep jumping back and forth. Okay, so I'm just gonna right there. Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with that. So what is disability etiquette? So disability etiquette refers to the respectful communication and interaction with people who have disabilities. And so this is how we, with respect, engage with folks, make sure that we're doing the right things in terms of interactions with individuals with disabilities. So if you go to the next slide, some basic things to think about, or some basic things to understand about disability etiquette is to rely on common sense, right? If it doesn't make sense for you to do something, you probably shouldn't do it. Or, if it feels icky, right, in terms of engaging with people with disabilities, you probably shouldn't or shouldn't do it. And then secondarily, behave in the same way that you would behave around anyone with or without disabilities, right? You want to treat people the same way you would, and because at the end of the day, we're people first, right? Yes, we have disabilities, but we want to be treated like anyone else, like an able-bodied individual or anyone else. Next slide, please. Some other tips and tricks to think about, next slide, is never, these are just some other quick examples. Never touch or distract a service dog without first asking the owner. Now, I know that everyone wants to engage with a service animal, right? Because they're so adorable and dogs are the best. Dogs are man's best friend. But what we have to remember about service animals is that they are working animals. So if they are out in public and in their vests, it's really important that we not distract them from doing their work. And it is, however, appropriate if the owner is in a situation where they can allow their service animal to be petted, to ask them first to say, hey, can I pet your service animal? But it comes down to having that communication element. We want to make sure that we're being age appropriate. We want to make sure that we're using age appropriate language depending on who we're talking to. We want to talk to people in an age appropriate way. As a 31-year-old, there are many instances where people will come up to me and go, how are you today? Kind of thinking that I am not cognitively aware of conversation. And so they're talking to me as if I was a 5-year-old, right? And that's not being age appropriate in the way that we're talking to people. Do not over assist or be patronizing, right? We all have a tendency to want to help people with disabilities, and some people need the help, but some people are very independent and can do things on their own. So don't feel like you have to overhelp someone. First, what you want to do is ask them if they need help, right? And say, like, if you see somebody struggling to open a door, ask and say, can I open the door for you? Sometimes they can handle it independently, but we want to give those individuals autonomy of choice to say whether they need help or not. Another really important thing to think about is when you are calling people with disabilities. We have a tendency to allow the phone to ring maybe 2 or 3 times before we hang up if the person doesn't pick up. If you're calling a person with a disability, it may take them longer to get to the phone. And so we need to let the phone ring all of its times before it goes to an answering machine, because it may take that individual longer to get to that phone call. Next slide, please. What happens if it all goes wrong, right? If you're engaging with people with disabilities and it all sort of starts to backfire. First thing we want to do is we want to remain calm, right? We don't want to overreact. We don't want to sort of hyperventilate in that situation. We want to remain calm. We want to be easygoing. We don't want to panic, right? We don't want to make things worse by kind of freaking out in that instance. We want to remain positive, right? We want to use positive language, not fear language or negative language in that instance. We want to make sure that we have open posture. Traditionally, when something goes wrong for a person with a disability, it's society's tendency to swarm that individual, right? And get really, really close to them and make sure that they are okay. Well, it is really, really important that we don't do that, because if you're invading their personal space in that close of a context, that could exacerbate the situation and make the situation even worse. And then lastly, like, we want to distract and redirect that person from the situation that may be making them uncomfortable, right? So if they're on edge, we want to distract them with something else and then potentially redirect them to another action or activity so that we can pull them away from the element that is making them feel uncomfortable or causing them distress. Best of all, we as the individual that is offering support, we don't want to freeze, right? If we freeze, then we're not getting out of the situation that is causing that person distress, like I said. So this kind of concludes our etiquette and sensitivity portion of the presentation. And then the next part, I'm so excited to share with you more about my work and what I do with Six Wheels. So next slide, please. So I started Six Wheels, as I said, kind of in my introduction, in 2014, and we offer three distinct services, of our work. And so first, we offer consulting services. So we can work in a variety of areas to work on consulting. We offer public speaking programs like the one we are engaging in today. And then I'm a registered lobbyist in the Virginia General Assembly, where I lobby on behalf of disability employment issues for people with disabilities. So I love my work. I'm currently working in all three aspects of my work, and it keeps me out of trouble and doing really, really good, amazing projects. And I'll talk more about some of those here in a little bit. Next slide, please. So why did I start Six Wheels Consulting? And for me, I don't know if I shared this in my introduction, but it really sort of came to me out of nowhere. One night in December of 2014, I was laying in bed, and at that point, I had been doing youth advocacy work and other things, and it sort of dawned on me, let me take all of my experience doing youth advocacy work, doing consulting without actually calling it consulting, and doing public speaking, and turn that into a business. Up until that point, I had looked for jobs, I had done job interviews, but I was not getting, go back one slide, Rashonda. Thank you, perfect. I was not getting good job interviews, or I was getting job interviews and I thought I was doing well in them, because for me, job interviews are giant conversations, but I was not getting offered full-time employment. So I decided to take the process into my own hands and start Six Wheels. And so, I wanted to do it to help people. I, again, wanted to do it to get people to think differently about attitudes and behaviors and disability in general. So that, to me, was my big motivator in starting Six Wheels. Next couple of slides we'll go through really quickly because I've already gone over these. But again, I do consulting work. We'll talk about that here in a second. I do, next slide, public speaking work. And then last slide, lobbying work as well. I love that picture. I look very stoic in that picture. So it always is a good thing. Next slide. Some examples of my consulting work. I'm very, very happy and blessed to have had the ability to work with some incredible organizations. I recently was an MC at an event for Anthem Healthkeepers Plus here in Richmond, where we were talking about young people in foster care. So I served as an MC for that event. I recently also did an assessment of the parking facilities at Dollywood theme parks in Tennessee, and was able to work a lot with the VPs and other incredible people at Dollywood. And then I just wrapped up an assessment of 2 office spaces for an organization called EAB. They are a education data firm where they collect data and provide consulting to higher education organizations. and they have several employees with disabilities, and they wanted somebody to come in and do an assessment of their DC office, and then also they have an office here in Richmond. So from a consulting standpoint, I get to work on a lot of really, really cool projects. The last one I'll mention is over the summer, I was able to do an assessment with Hopewell County Public Schools for one of their local elementary schools. They're looking at getting more accessible playground equipment. And so they wanted to bring me in and talk to them about, what accessible playground equipment could look like. Next slide, please. From a speaking standpoint, I have gotten to do, again, wonderful programming where I've been a keynote at a number of different events, both virtually and in person. I've gotten to do some work with PlanRVA in the past. So again, always love to be back with such an amazing group. And then I've also gotten to work with organizations like Center Healthcare, talking about how to make healthcare spaces more accessible. And I just did a program earlier this month with Virginia Housing around disability and employment in the workplace. So I'm, again, just very blessed, and public speaking is where I am most comfortable. My greatest strength is my ability to share a message. And so anytime I can do that and impact an audience like I'm doing today makes me incredibly happy and feel incredibly honored to do the work that I do. And then next slide. I also, as I mentioned, lobby on behalf of an organization called the Virginia Association of People Supporting Employment First. And so that means we want to have people with disabilities working in the workplace for competitive wages. And I go down to the General Assembly 4 days a week during the General Assembly session and work on policy issues as it relates to employment for people with disabilities. So those are some basics and some previous clients that I've gotten to work with in all spaces of my work. And I love my job. I get to wake up and I get to engage with people like you every day and hopefully change people's minds about disability inclusion. The next section is kind of about disability in the workplace. So if we can go to the next slide. Next slide. How do we bring people with disabilities into the workplace? So how do we first identify and recruit those individuals? Next slide, please. First, we want to make sure that our imagery represents and shows people with disabilities. So that could be in our brochures, on our websites, in our other collateral that we may have as an organization. So if PlanRVA has pamphlets and other things, do we have people with disabilities represented in those brochures? If we do, is that imagery authentic, right? Typically we go into clip art and we say disability, and it brings up an image of somebody who is more than likely an actor or actress, and they put them in a situation to where they are in a situation with a disability. So are we authentically showing people like myself who, because of my disability and because of my wheelchair and other things, are in those images? In our phrasing for our job announcements, are we, when we say that we want all people to apply, do we really mean all people? And if we do, are we phrasing it in a way that encourages people with disabilities to apply? And then are we showing a diversity of disability, including visible and invisible disabilities? Next slide, please. So from an imagery standpoint, we want to do this, and I'm going to show you over the next two or three slides examples of really, really good disability imagery. Next slide. So again, this is an authentic person with a disability navigating an office space. And so can we use these types of images in our materials, as I mentioned? Next slide. I love this one because it shows multiple ways to access an elevator, right? We have an elevator button at the top like we traditionally do, and then we have an elevator button at the bottom that would allow for somebody to kind of kick the button rather than push the button if they don't have dexterity to do that. Next slide. Here's another example of just everyone with disabilities kind of hanging out in an office space. Again, kind of authentically showing that they are all people with disabilities. And these are things that we could definitely use to promote our work at PlanRVA better and to be more inclusive. Next slide. Here are examples of images that don't really work. So I'll show you the next two. Next slide. Here is an image of somebody in a wheelchair. And if I had to guess, right, I would think that they are probably not an authentic person with a disability. Traditionally, that wheelchair does not look very, that looks like a wheelchair that you would find in a hospital space, right? And so to me, if I was looking at this image, I wouldn't necessarily feel like that's fully inclusive and fully showing people with disabilities like the last previous images that I shared. Next slide. Same thing, and I think this highlights this even more, right? This kind of wheelchair, again, doesn't really look super authentic. Again, they kind of look like they put a person in a wheelchair and took the image to use. And so we really want to get to a space where we're using imagery like the first 3 or 4 slides of pictures that I showed you rather than these last 2. Next slide. How do we find people with disabilities to recruit them and to bring them into the workspace? We want to connect with other like-minded disability organizations to say, hey, do you have potential individuals who would want to come work for PlanRVA who could fill these jobs that we are trying to fill? Could you post job announcements on disability job boards, either virtually or actual boards? I know we still have some job boards in certain places. Could you go to disability organizations like the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services and say, hey, we have these job openings? Could you also attend disability related job fairs and do tables with PlanRVA or do virtual job fairs? A lot of times disability organizations will host disability job fairs to get people with disabilities hired in these spaces. Next slide. Again, attend virtual events and then kind of think about everything that we've already talked about with our imagery, with our websites, with how we're finding people, different things like that. Next slide. The other thing that's really important is the language that we use in our job announcements, as I mentioned. And I know the language there on the bottom is very, very tiny to see, but it essentially says something along the lines of, if you need an accommodation for the application process, please let us know and we will happily provide it for you. Making people aware that they can have accommodations for the process makes things that much better and makes them more likely to apply. Again, if they see imagery that represents disability, if there's a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, if that includes disability in that statement, if you have accommodations in place during the application process and promoting that language in your job announcements. Next slide. For organizations, right, is your level of comfort around hiring a person with a disability, is that real, right? Can you say that you feel comfortable and bring people with disabilities into your workspace? Does the candidate truly believe that they will be legitimately considered, right? We don't want to be doing things out of token to say, hey, we want to have a person with a disability. We want the people that we're bringing into our organization to be the most talented and most amazing people possible to bring into our spaces. So can the potential employee feel that energy when they're applying for a job? And we want to make sure that they're qualified for those jobs as well. Is your wording of your job announcement simply to comply, or are you trying to reach kind of that disability quota, or are you genuinely wanting to bring the best people into your workspace? And does that include people with disabilities in order to make that happen? Next slide, please. What can managers do to help with the recruitment process? You can attend programs like today, where hopefully you're learning about some of the strategies, and then you can also work with your HR department to make sure that you're getting talented people, and talented people with disabilities are rising to the top to potentially be considered for jobs. don't just delegate that to your HR department. Be involved in that process if you are a manager for PlanRVA or any other organization. Next slide. Ask for input from current potential employees with disabilities on how to make the recruitment process and the interview process and the entire process really be as smooth as possible. And then ask people with disabilities to be involved with the interview process for new potential hires as well. Next slide. The other thing that we can think about is how are we interviewing people with disabilities, right? For some people with certain types of disabilities, they might not be able to thrive in a traditional style of interview. I thrive in a traditional style of interview because I love to communicate and I love to talk. And so for me, it's like sharing a story. But people with autism or people with other cognitive disabilities might not do their best in a traditional job interview. So do we have experiential interviews where they can show how they would do the job? Do we allow them to create a video of themselves to talk about their qualifications, to show their qualifications? Different ways to get at the information that we need to allow that person to show that they are talented and capable of doing the job that is required. That's about bringing people with disabilities into the workplace. The last and final section is talking about advantages of hiring people with disabilities. Next slide. Next slide. The first thing that people with disabilities are going to bring into the workplace is loyalty, right? Because people with disabilities for so long have had a challenging time finding a good job that pays really well. If they find that and they are happy in that job, I am fairly confident in saying that they are going to stick around for long periods of time and be loyal to the organization that they're working with because they have been given that opportunity to be successful. Next slide, please. People with disabilities are also incredibly resilient, right? So if it all goes wrong and say you put in this huge bid to a project and it doesn't go according to plan, people with disabilities are going to be able to bounce back a lot quicker than able-bodied folks traditionally, because we have to be resilient on an everyday basis because we face adversity every day, as the slide says. So resiliency is something that is incredibly beneficial to someone in the workplace. Next slide. We're going to be thankful for the opportunity, right? Not that we want to, again, feel like a token, but we're going to feel a great level of appreciation and pride in the organization that gives us that opportunity to show that we can be a valued member of an employee base in an organization, such as PlanRVA or any other organization. So, we're going to be have, like I said, a ton of pride in that job experience. Next slide, please. Another really, really huge benefit of bringing people with disabilities into the workplace is this whole idea of it raising the self-esteem and the entire morale of the entire organization, right? If you have a coworker that has disabilities and they are showing you different ways to solve problems, different ways to maybe think about things, right? That's going to raise everyone else's antennas, right? And they're going to start thinking differently and sort of thinking in the way that the employee with disabilities does. And that's only going to make the entire organization as a whole that much stronger and see things in unique ways. Next slide, please. With that in mind, right, and building off of that, you're going to be able to think outside of the box. You're going to be able to, I know for me, I see things through a seated lens every day. And so that allows me to sort of view things in ways that able-bodied people do not. And so it's really, really important to bring those kinds of mindsets into a workspace. Next slide, please. The other really big topic I often get asked about is how COVID has impacted our way of doing work. And for me, it's really established this new wave of work, right? And this way of work that I think we need to continue to move forward as we continue to come out of the pandemic. We're not really out of the pandemic yet, but as we continue to try and get back into a new normal, I think we need to keep all of the elements I'm about to discuss really quickly around beyond just where we currently are. Next slide, please. Oops. So allowing people with disabilities to work from home, and the data has shown that during COVID, more people with disabilities have been able to be hired than previously. Because for years we have said, people with disabilities have said, hey, we want to work from home. We want to, be able to do that. And employers have said, oh, we can't do that because that would require way too many accommodations. That would, that there would be too much of a cost burden there. But COVID has shown that we can do it and we can have a better work-life balance. And people with disabilities are thriving in that space, right? Because they're finally feeling like they can be part of and fully part of the workforce. And so, allow people to work from home either all the time or have different split schedules. Maybe make that an accommodation for somebody with a disability. Next slide. The other, Zoom and other virtual avenues have allowed us all to remain connected. I am the most extrovert that you'll meet, right? And I want to see people in person, but I have found myself to be more productive over this whole work from home era, because I'm able to get more work done. I'm able to jump from meeting to meeting because everything has a Zoom component. And so one of the challenges I would challenge PlanRVA and any other organization to consider is have a virtual component to everything that we do, even when we get back to, going to the office more regularly. There might be an individual who can't attend a meeting in a physical space, but you better believe that they could jump on a Zoom link and still engage and be part of that process. So, I don't want any organization to, when we come out of this, to say, all right, everyone's going to go back to work in a normal environment. We're not going to have, Zoom capabilities or different things like that, because there might be people that still need that. I know for me, it's so much easier for me to jump on a Zoom link and engage in that way than potentially going to meetings. I'm still perfectly fine to go to meetings, but it's having that option that's really, really important. Next slide, please. Inclusion is so important, right? And that is around the workplace. That's around really anything that we've talked about today. And I think that this slide really does a really nice job of sort of illustrating that idea, right? Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance while you're there. And at the end of the day, everyone wants to feel like they belong in the workplace or in anything that we've talked about. And belonging is dancing like no one's watching, right? It's a sense of, I feel like I can be myself at PlanRVA. I can make an impact. I can, even with my disability, have unique ways of thinking about things. And so we really want to think about inclusive strategies when we're doing all of our work and making sure everyone can feel like they can bring their true, authentic selves to everything that they do at PlanRVA. Next slide. We're going to open it up to Q&A in 1 second. And I know Rashonda said we will do that at the end. Next slide. I just want to share my my social media information with all of you who are watching. And if you want to follow me on social, please do so. And if you want to continue the conversation, I would love to do that as well. So feel free to follow us. And then next slide. I just want to say thank you. And again, I'm going to have some time to take a few questions, but just want to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of the webinar series today. And I hope the information that was shared, I know we went through it quickly, but I hope the information that was shared makes an impact on you. So Rashonda, I will turn it over to you and see what kind of questions we may have.
Matthew, that was an incredibly informative presentation. Just thank you so much. And I also just wanted to add, we are grateful, Matthew, to have you as a partner at PlanRVA. As we strive to become a more inclusive agency, we felt it was important to engage Six Wheels Consultant, not just in our current efforts, but also in our future efforts. One example of that is having you review some of our internal documents that we use to engage the public. As a staff, we understand that we have limitations, and so wanting to ensure that when we are reaching out to the public or we're hosting meetings out in the community, that we are inclusive and everyone in the region is able to participate. Another example, when we talk about future opportunities, as you know, PlanRVA is moving to a new office space. And I understand that, Matthew, you were invited early on into the process to be a part of how we look at moving into this new office space and making sure that this place, this new space is inclusive. Can you speak more to some of the things that you shared with Martha and our developers and the team on things that we should be mindful of when we're moving into a new space?
Sure, I would love to. So yes, I've been very fortunate to be part of that kind of construction process. And there are a lot of things that you should think about, right? Do you have an open floor plan space so that anybody who has a mobility aid of any kind can navigate that space freely? Do you have removable and adjustable furniture like standing desks and other things that can raise up and down for people to more easily get under those desk spaces and maneuver them if they need to, if they're a wheelchair user or again have any other kind of mobility aid? Do you remove, this is the bane of my existence, do you remove trash cans and other elements that are really not necessary at times out of primary spaces, meaning like in front of your elevator buttons, out of your doorways? Like we traditionally love to put little trash cans in every little office, but all of those things, including cigarette butt holders, become barriers to allowing me to get to the elevator button or other things within an office space. Are you thinking about culture? And like, are you, again, as we talked about in the presentation, are you representing culture by showing imagery in the right way and doing things like that? There's a lot more, and I want to make sure I get to some of the other questions. I saw some in the chat, but I think those are some really good basic ways to think about it. Obviously, we can do a lot more. And if we have more time, I'd love to address those, but we can also continue the conversation offline.
I appreciate that, Matthew. And yes, we do have 3 questions in the Q&A. I think that you've answered most of them in one way or another. So it said, what typical industries or types of businesses do you normally work with? You shared a slide with some of your consultant successes. There's another question about what are some easy ways that offices can be more welcoming to people with disabilities that can be implemented even if they can't budget for major renovations. And I think that you shared some of that as well. So I'm gonna go to this other question at the top, which is, as a person who uses a mobility device, what are some challenges that you face in an old and historic city like Richmond that was largely developed by the ADA?
Oh, there are so many challenges and lovely things. I love Richmond. I've lived here all my life. And I have to go downtown quite a bit because of my lobbying work, right? The General Assembly is downtown, and I go down there quite a bit. Sidewalks, if they have not been renovated, the cobblestones, if they're coming up through the ground, are terrible. And they make it very, very hard for a wheelchair user to navigate. Signage and having clear signage of, hey, here's where your curb cuts are. Here's where the pulse bus goes, right? And here are different things like that would be incredibly valuable. With the pulse bus pickups that pick up in the middle of the street, that's really, really dangerous for anyone, but even more so for a person with a disability. I know that we've heard stories about people dying and being severely injured by those kinds of things. Other things to think about are, cutting down trees and other things that get in the way of get in the way of curb cuts or sidewalks, right? There's a lot of overgrown foliage that doesn't allow for smooth access, right? And how can we work with the city? How can we work with the Virginia Commonwealth? How can we work with our partners to make sure that that is regularly kept up to date? I know that I've done several kind of reviews of spaces like that, and it is challenging. Like, I know myself and one of your colleagues, Rebecca Cesaris, has done a lot of that work, and we've done many reviews together, and it's frustrating that, like, some of the basic things, right? Like putting a sign right directly in front of a handicapped parking spot that opens up to a sidewalk, right? If there's a tree right there, or like a no parking sign right there, then my ramp won't unfold, or different things like that. And that comes down to how we're planning, how we're developing our cities, how we're doing all of these things that we're talking about. And I think it's really important, as part of that, to have me and other people with disabilities around the table to help make sure when we're planning spaces, that we're doing it in a way that maintains accessibility and Richmond's historic look at the same time.
I appreciate that, Matthew. And the questions continue to roll in. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but like I said, you are a partner of PlanRVA, and I know that we will continue the conversation. I just wanted to say thank you again for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our webinar and look forward to the information that will be available over the next few months to support this continued conversation. There are so many great things happening in the Richmond region, and the Better Together webinar is a platform to highlight everyday heroes like Matthew that are working to make the Richmond region a safer and more equitable place for all to thrive. A few announcements. And so very quickly, just want to share that, again, PlanRVA is on the move. We are gearing up to move to the current at 424 Whole Street, which is in Richmond. Earlier this month, the team, we had our last day of on-site meetings at the Forest Hill Avenue office. So stay tuned for the schedule of meetings in our new office space that will be beginning in 2023. The PlanRVA Commission meeting meets on November 10th at 9 a.m. And that will be at the Community Foundation. Our next CVTA meeting will meet on October 28th at 8:30 at the Chesterfield County Administration Building. RRTPO, the Policy Board, will meet on November 3rd at 9:30 at Creative Virginia. We would also love for you to stay connected by following us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And lastly, just as the African proverb goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. At PlanRVA, we believe that we are better together. See you all next time.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.